I learned the hard way that a broken gate can cost you a lot more than just a sense of security. It can cost you your peace, your money, and nearly your home, all because one person decides the rules matter more than reality. My name is Jack, and for the better part of 15 years, I've lived in a quiet little subdivision called Oak Creek Estates. It's the kind of place people move to when they want a decent-sized yard without being completely out in the sticks. We have a couple of looping roads, a small park with a playground that's seen better days, and a single entrance marked by a brick sign and a wrought iron gate that, for the last 6 of those years, had been permanently stuck in the open position. I own a small welding and metal fabrication business. It's a good trade. I make custom railings, repair heavy equipment, and build things that are meant to last. I like the honesty of it. Metal doesn't lie. You either do the job right, or it fails. Our homeowners association was, for most of my time here, a benign joke. It was run by a rotating cast of old-timers who mostly just made sure the grass in the common areas got mowed and the holiday decorations went up in December. Dues were low, and nobody bothered anyone. We were a community, not a corporation. If a neighbor's fence fell over, you went over with a hammer and some nails, not a rulebook and a fine. It was a good system, based on the simple principle of not being a nuisance. It worked because we were neighbors, not subjects. Then, about 3 years ago, Carol moved in. She bought the corner house, the biggest one in the development, after her husband, a man who always looked vaguely exhausted, got a big promotion. Carol was, to put it mildly, a woman with an abundance of administrative energy and a severe deficit of things to administrate. She saw the sleepy, laissez-faire nature of our HOA not as a feature but as a bug. A personal affront to her sense of order. It didn't take her long to get herself elected to the board. The turnout for those meetings was usually abysmal, so anyone who actually wanted the job could have it. She became treasurer first, then secretary, and within 18 months, she was the president. And that's when the changes began. They started small, almost laughably so. A flurry of emails and notices taped to our doors. All trash receptacles had to be stored out of sight, not just on non-pickup days, but at all times. Holiday decorations could only be displayed within a specific 3-week window. The color palette for approved front door paint was narrowed from anything reasonable to a choice of 3 shades of beige. Most of us just sighed and complied. It was annoying, but not worth a fight. We were busy people with jobs and families. The path of least resistance was to just move the trash cans into the garage and buy a can of Sandstone Dream paint. We figured it was a phase, that she'd eventually get bored and move on to terrorizing a garden club or something. We were wrong. Her appetite for control only grew with each new, unopposed regulation she imposed. She walked the neighborhood with a clipboard and a measuring tape, checking the height of people's grass. The central monument to our collective apathy, however, remained the front gate. It had been installed 2 decades ago with great fanfare and a hefty special assessment. It featured an automated system with keypads and remote clickers. It worked for about 10 years, then the main motor burned out. The board at the time got a few quotes to fix it, winced at the 5-figure price tag, and decided that since we lived in an incredibly low-crime area, it was a luxury we could live without. The gate was manually pushed open, a chain was looped around it and a nearby post, and there it stayed. A big, ornamental suggestion of exclusivity that fooled no one. For 6 years, it was a landmark, a running joke. Carol, however, did not find it funny. To her, the broken gate was a symbol of the chaos she was destined to conquer. The problem was, the current residents had no appetite for the $10,000 special assessment it would take to fix it. We'd voted it down twice since she'd taken over. We liked our money more than we disliked the broken gate. Thwarted, Carol couldn't fix it, but she was determined to do something. That something arrived in the form of a certified letter. I remember the day clearly. I was in my workshop, the smell of ozone and hot metal in the air, grinding a bead on a custom trailer hitch. The mail carrier knocked on the roll-up door, looking apologetic. Certified mail is never good news. It's either the IRS or someone who wants to be the IRS when they grow up. This was the latter. The letter, printed on thick, self-important letterhead, announced a new gate security protocol. Since the automated system was under review for future repair, the gate would now be manually closed and locked every night at 9 p.m. and unlocked every morning at 6 a.m. A new, heavy-duty padlock had been installed. Every household would be required to use their assigned key to open and close the gate if they entered or exited during these secured hours. The final paragraph was the real kicker. Failure to resecure the gate after passing through will result in a non-negotiable fine of $50 for the first offense, increasing to $100 for subsequent offenses. I read it 3 times, each time with a growing sense of disbelief. This was absurdity elevated to an art form. The gate was a single panel that blocked one of 2 vehicle lanes. You could literally just drive around it on the grass. A person could walk around it in about 5 steps. It secured nothing. It was a decorative fence panel that she was now trying to turn into a checkpoint. This wasn't about security, it was about compliance. It was a test of loyalty to her regime, and I had no intention of passing. My first direct interaction with the new policy came a few days later. I had a late job, a piece of equipment that needed repair on site at a farm about an hour away. I got back to the neighborhood around 11 at night, tired and covered in grease. And there it was. The gate, which had stood open and welcoming for 6 years, was closed. A thick, brand-new chain was wrapped around it, secured with a padlock the size of a fist. A small, solar-powered light, another one of Carol's recent upgrades, cast a sterile glow on the scene. I sat in my truck for a full minute, just staring. This was performative security. It was a hassle for the residents and a minor curiosity for anyone who actually wanted to get in. I thought about just driving my heavy-duty truck over the curb and onto the grass, but I was too tired for that level of confrontation. So I sighed, got out, fumbled with the tiny, cheap key that had been left in my mailbox, and opened the lock. The chain was heavy. The gate groaned in protest as I swung it open. I drove my truck through, got out again, swung the groaning gate shut, and rewrapped the cold, heavy chain. The whole process took about 3 minutes. 3 minutes of pointless, infuriating theater. The next morning, I was out early, heading to my workshop. As I approached the entrance, I saw Mrs. Gable, a widow in her 80s who lived down the street from me, standing by the closed gate next to her car. She was frail, and the chain was clearly too heavy for her. She was struggling to get it unwrapped. "Morning, Martha," I said, getting out of my truck. "Let me get that for you." She gave me a grateful, weary smile. "Oh, thank you, Jack. This new system is just dreadful. I have my weekly doctor's appointment, and I was afraid I was going to be trapped in here." I unwrapped the chain and swung the gate open for her. "It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen," I muttered, more to myself than to her. "It's that Carol," she whispered, as if the woman might be hiding in the bushes. "She says it's for our own protection." I held the gate for her as she drove through, then I got in my truck and followed, leaving the gate wide open. I didn't have time for this nonsense, and seeing an elderly woman struggle with a chain just to get to her doctor solidified my resolve. I wasn't going to participate. That afternoon, as I was unloading some steel stock, Carol's golf cart came zipping down the street and screeched to a halt at the end of my driveway. She got out, clipboard in hand. She was wearing a visor and a polo shirt with the Oak Creek Estates logo she'd had custom made. She looked like a disgruntled tennis coach. "Jack," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "We have a problem, do we, Carol?" I asked, leaning against the side of my truck. "Yes." "The gate was left wide open this morning at 6:15 a.m. Your truck was seen exiting the community at that time. You were the last one out." I was amazed she had the timeline down so precisely. It was both impressive and deeply creepy. "That's right," I said. I opened it for Martha Gable. She couldn't manage the chain. "I left it open for the next person. That is a direct violation of the gate security protocol," she stated, as if quoting scripture. Section 4, Paragraph 2. The gate must be secured by the last individual to pass through during secured hours. You will be receiving a fine for $50. I crossed my arms. This was the moment. The point where you either bend the knee or you don't. Carol, the gate is broken. It secures nothing. You're making an 80-year-old woman wrestle with a heavy chain in the dark for no reason. It's a hazard. And it's ridiculous. It is not ridiculous, she snapped, her eyes narrowing. It is the rule. The rules are in place to maintain community standards and security. Your opinion of the rule is irrelevant. Compliance is mandatory. I decided to try a different tack. Reason. Logic. My native tongue. Look, I'm a metal fabricator. I fix things like this for a living. The motor is shot, but the track and the gate itself are fine. I could rebuild the drive system, automate it, and tie it into the old keypad for a fraction of what those big security companies quoted you. I'd do it for cost of materials and a little for my time. We could have a working gate for under $2,000. I expected this to appeal to her sense of fiscal responsibility. She was always going on about the budget during the rare meetings I attended. Instead, she looked at me as if I had offered to perform surgery with a rusty spoon. Absolutely not, she said, her voice sharp. All community repairs must be carried out by licensed, bonded, and pre-approved vendors. We have a list. Your little workshop business is not on that list. It would be a liability. A liability? I'm licensed and insured, Carol. I do this for a living. I probably know more about this gate than anyone on your pre-approved list. The decision is final, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. I am not going to argue with you. Pay the fine, Jack. And follow the rules. Or the next one will be $100. She turned, got back in her golf cart, and sped off, leaving me standing in my driveway. The conversation hadn't been a negotiation, it had been a proclamation. She didn't want a solution. She didn't want a fixed gate. She wanted control. She wanted me to wrap that chain, click that lock, and acknowledge her authority. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I wasn't going to do it. The $50 fine arrived in the mail a few days later, a crisp invoice with a stern, red past due stamp already on it. I threw it in a drawer. As I had promised myself, I continued to leave the gate open whenever I left in the morning. Each time, I'd get another invoice. First the 50, then 100, then another 100. They were coming via certified mail now, which meant I had to keep trekking to the post office to sign for my own harassment. Carol was clearly keeping a diligent watch. I imagined her sitting in her front window with a pair of binoculars and a stopwatch, her heart filling with righteous fury every time I drove away without performing the ritual of the chain. My little act of defiance started to have ripple effects. A few other neighbors, emboldened by my example, also started forgetting to lock the gate. The morning commute became a sort of passive-aggressive lottery. Sometimes you'd arrive to find it open, a small gift from a fellow rebel. Other times, it would be closed and locked, a sign that a loyalist had passed through. Carol's response was to escalate. She sent out a mass email, dripping with sanctimony. It has come to the board's attention that certain residents are willfully disregarding the gate security protocol, jeopardizing the safety and security of our entire community. This dereliction of duty will not be tolerated. The board has voted to install a security camera to monitor the gate area. Violators will be identified and fined accordingly. Furthermore, unpaid fines will now accrue interest and may result in a lien being placed upon your property. The word lien was a splash of cold water. That was real. That could affect my credit, my ability to sell my house. This had moved beyond a petty squabble over rules and into genuine financial threat. My wife, who had been cautiously supportive up to this point, was getting nervous. A lien, Jack? Is this really worth it? She asked one evening, holding the latest email from Carol. Can't we just lock the stupid gate? It's not about the gate anymore, I tried to explain. It's the principle. She's on a power trip. She's making our lives harder for no reason other than to prove she can. If we let her get away with this, what's next? And what about Martha? I saw the Amazon delivery guy leave a package for her out on the main road yesterday because he couldn't be bothered with the lock. She had to walk all the way out there to get it. It's not right. The community, which had been grumbling in private, was now openly divided. There was a pro-Carol faction, mostly newer residents who liked the idea of strict rules and protecting their investment. They saw the rest of us as troublemakers. Then there was my camp, the old-timers and people who valued practicality over pointless regulations. The neighborhood was tense. The friendly waves across lawns were replaced with suspicious glares. The final straw for me was when I received a bill for a total of $750 in fines, with a new line item for accrued interest and administrative fees. Attached was a formal notice of intent to file a lien. She was actually going to do it. This petty tyrant was going to cloud the title on my family's home over a gate that didn't even work. That's when I knew I had to do more than just ignore her. I had to fight back. But I couldn't do it alone, and I couldn't do it without a plan. I was a welder, not a lawyer. I knew how to deal with the immutable laws of physics, not the baffling labyrinth of HOA bylaws. I called the only person I knew who might have some insight. My next-door neighbor, Arthur. Arthur was a retired accountant in his late 70s who had lived in Oak Creek since the first houses were built. He was quiet, meticulous, and had served as the HOA treasurer for nearly a decade back in the good old days. If anyone knew where the bodies were buried, it was him. I found him tending his prize-winning roses. I laid out the whole story, the confrontation, the fines, the lien notice. He listened patiently, snipping a dead blossom here and there. When I was done, he straightened up and took off his gardening gloves. "Carol," he said with a sigh, as if the name itself was a burden. "She's a piece of work. All vinegar and no sugar." "A lien, you say?" "That's a serious escalation. I don't know what to do, Arthur. I can't afford a long legal battle, but I can't just roll over and let her do this." He looked thoughtful for a moment. "An HOA board has a lot of power, but it's not absolute. They are bound by the bylaws, and more importantly, by state law. They have a fiduciary duty to the community. They are supposed to act in our best interest. Making an old woman struggle with a chain isn't in anyone's best interest, but how do I prove that?" "It's her word against mine. You don't fight her on her terms," Arthur said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic light I hadn't seen before. "You don't argue about the interpretation of the rules. You scrutinize her execution of them. You look at the money, Jack. Always look at the money." He invited me inside, and over a glass of iced tea, he gave me my first lesson in HOA warfare. He told me that as a homeowner, I had the legal right to inspect the association's financial records. The budget, the expenditures, the contracts. All of it. "She can't legally refuse you," he explained. "She can make it difficult, of course. She can charge you for copies, make you schedule an appointment. But she has to show you the books. And when you look at them, you look for the things that don't make sense." He also gave me the name of a lawyer, a man named Davies who specialized in real estate and community association law. "He's not cheap," Arthur warned. "But he's sharp. A consultation might be worth the money just to know where you stand legally." Armed with a new sense of purpose, I went home and drafted a formal, polite email to the HOA board, citing the relevant state statute, and requesting an appointment to review the financial records for the past 3 fiscal years. The reply from Carol was swift and chilly. My appointment was scheduled for 2 weeks out, at a specific 1-hour time slot, and I would be charged 25 cents per page for any copies I wished to make. It was clearly meant to be an inconvenience, but it was the opening I needed. My next call was to Mr. Davies, the lawyer. I spent an hour on the phone with him, explaining the situation. He was exactly as Arthur had described, sharp, no nonsense, and not one to sugarcoat things. "Frankly, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice dry, "fighting an HOA on a fine for a rule violation is like wrestling a pig. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. They can often recover their legal fees from you if they win, which they usually do. The courts tend to defer to the association's established rules." My heart sank. "So I should just pay it." "I didn't say that," he corrected. "Fighting the fine itself is a losing battle. But a lien is another matter. They have to follow proper procedure. More importantly, You mentioned your neighbor, Arthur, suggested looking at the financials. That's the right move. An HOA board's power is built on the trust of its members. If you can prove a breach of that trust, a failure of their fiduciary duty, then the whole house of cards comes down. The fines become irrelevant because the authority that issued them is proven to be corrupt or incompetent. He gave me some advice on what to look for: no-bid contracts, payments to companies with unknown addresses, recurring fees for services not rendered. You're looking for waste, fraud, and abuse, he concluded. If you find it, you call me back. Then we'll have something to work with. The 2 weeks leading up to my appointment were tense. The camera went up at the gate, a sleek, dark dome that seemed to watch my every move. The fines kept coming. I was now over $1,000 in the hole. I felt like a marked man in my own neighborhood. But now I had a mission. This wasn't just about my own fight anymore. It was about uncovering the truth. The day of the appointment, I met Arthur for coffee beforehand. He gave me a checklist he'd drawn up on a yellow legal pad. Focus on vendor payments, he instructed. Especially recurring ones. Cross-reference them with the annual budget. See if they match. And pay special attention to anything related to that gate. Carol conducted the meeting in the community clubhouse, a small, sterile room that smelled of air freshener. She sat across a folding table from me, the financial binders stacked neatly in front of her. 2 of her board allies were there, flanking her like stone-faced bodyguards. The atmosphere was thick with hostility. You have 1 hour, Carol announced, tapping her watch. The copier is in the corner. I opened the first binder and started going through it, page by page. It was a morass of invoices, bank statements, and spreadsheets. For the first 45 minutes, I found nothing but the usual, mundane expenses: landscaping, insurance, water for the sprinklers. It was all disappointingly normal. I could feel Carol's smug gaze on me, enjoying my fruitless search. Then, in the binder for the previous fiscal year, I found it. A recurring monthly payment. $300. Every single month. The vendor was listed as Secure Gate Solutions, LLC. The description simply said, Gate Maintenance and Service Contract. My heart started beating a little faster. A service contract? For a gate that had been broken for 6 years? I flipped back through the records. The payments were there, month after month, year after year, going back to right after Carol took over. I quickly did the math in my head. $300 a month, for nearly 3 years. That was over $10,000. I'd like to make some copies, I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the excitement I felt. Carol smirked. Of course. 25 cents a page. I walked over to the ancient, slow copier and began feeding in the invoices from Secure Gate Solutions. I copied every single one, along with the corresponding bank statements showing the cashed checks. The pile of paper grew, and so did the triumphant feeling in my gut. This was it. This was what Arthur and the lawyer had been talking about. I noticed something else. The address on the invoices was a P.O. box in a town 30 miles away. There was no phone number, no website. It was as anonymous as a company could be. My hour was up. I paid Carol $17.50 in quarters for my 70 pages of copies, a small price to pay for what I now held in my hands. Find what you were looking for, she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. I think so, I said, meeting her gaze. This has been very educational. I drove straight to Arthur's house. I spread the copies out on his dining room table. He put on his reading glasses and leaned over them, his finger tracing the lines of figures. Well, he murmured after a few minutes of silence. Secure Gate Solutions. I've never heard of them. And a $300 monthly fee for maintaining a broken piece of equipment is peculiar. It's more than peculiar, Arthur. It's theft. We don't know that for sure yet, he cautioned, ever the meticulous accountant. It could just be gross incompetence. Paying a contract they forgot to cancel, but the P.O. box? The lack of a phone number? It feels shady. Arthur tapped the paper. There's one way to find out. Every LLC registered in this state is a matter of public record. The Secretary of State's website has a business entity search. We need to find out who owns SecureGate Solutions. We went to his computer. Arthur navigated the clunky government website with surprising speed. He typed the company name into the search box. We held our breath. A single result popped up. We clicked on it. The registration details filled the screen. The name of the registered agent, the person who legally represented the company, was a man named Martin Gable. The name didn't ring a bell for me. But Arthur let out a low whistle. Martin Gable, he said slowly. I remember that name. He was at the last community barbecue. Carol introduced him. Her brother-in-law, there it was. The smoking gun. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. For 3 years, Carol had been using our HOA dues to pay a fake monthly maintenance fee to a shell company run by her own relative. She hadn't fixed the gate because a broken gate was more profitable for her family than a working one. The new security protocol, the fines, the camera, it was all a diversion. It was a way to create the illusion of action, to make it seem like she was taking the gate seriously, all while she was siphoning money out of our community fund. My defiance hadn't just been an annoyance to her, it had threatened to draw attention to the very thing she was trying to hide. The anger I felt was cold and clear. This woman had harassed me, threatened my home, and pitted neighbor against neighbor, all to cover up her grubby little scam. She had turned our community into her own personal piggy bank. What do we do now? I asked Arthur. Now, he said, a grim smile on his face, we prepare. We have the data. We need to present it in a way that is undeniable. The annual HOA meeting is in 3 weeks. That will be our stage. My next call was to Mr. Davies. I explained what we had found. For the first time, I heard a note of actual excitement in his voice. Bingo, he said. This is it. This is no longer about your fines. This is about embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. This is a kill shot. He advised us on the next steps. We needed to be careful. We had to assemble the evidence into a clear, concise presentation. He told me to create a timeline, to scan all the documents, and to prepare for a public confrontation. He also gave me a stark warning. She will not go down quietly, he said. When you corner an animal like that, they get vicious. Be prepared for her to lie, to attack you personally, to try and discredit you. Don't engage. Just stick to the facts. The facts are on your side. The next 3 weeks were a blur of activity. Arthur, with his accountant's mind, was in his element. He created spreadsheets that tracked every payment. He made charts and graphs. I, with my practical skills, focused on the presentation. I borrowed a projector from a friend and learned how to use it. I scanned every invoice, every bank statement, every page from the Secretary of State's website, creating a digital trail of Carol's deceit. We also started talking to a few other neighbors we trusted, quietly, one-on-one. We didn't show them everything, but we told them enough to ensure they'd be at the meeting. The word started to spread. Something big was going to happen at the annual meeting. The attendance, which was usually a dozen people at most, was going to be much, much higher this year. The night of the meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. People were standing along the walls. I had never seen more than a third of these faces at a meeting before. Carol and her board sat at the front table, looking slightly bewildered by the turnout, but she quickly masked it with her usual air of imperious control. The meeting started with the usual boring pleasantries. Minutes from the last meeting were read and approved. Carol gave her president's report, a long, self-congratulatory speech about all the improvements she had made to the community, including the successful implementation of the new gate security protocol. A few of her supporters applauded weakly. I could feel the tension in the room ratcheting up. Finally, it was time for the treasurer's report, the part of the meeting where they discussed the budget. This was our moment. The treasurer, a nervous man who was clearly one of Carol's puppets, began to drone through the line items. landscaping, insurance, common area utilities. When he got to maintenance and repairs, I stood up. "Excuse me," I said, my voice louder than I intended. "I have a question about the budget." Every head in the room turned towards me. Carol glared. "There will be a question and answer period at the end of the meeting, Jack. I think this question is relevant to the budget discussion," I insisted, my heart pounding. "I'd like to ask about a specific line item under maintenance. It's a monthly payment of $300 to a company called SecureGate Solutions. Could you please explain what that service is for?" The treasurer stammered, looking to Carol for help. Carol took the microphone. "That is the standard service contract for the maintenance of our front gate's electronic systems," she said smoothly, without a hint of hesitation. It was a well-rehearsed lie. "That's fascinating," I said, walking towards the front of the room. "Because, as we all know, the gate's electronic systems haven't worked in 6 years. So I'm a little confused about what we've been paying over $10,000 for." A murmur went through the crowd. I saw Arthur at the back of the room give me a slight nod. I had plugged the projector in before the meeting started. Now, I switched it on. The first image, a copy of an invoice from SecureGate Solutions, flashed onto the screen behind Carol's head. "This," I announced, "is one of the 36 invoices paid by our HOA to this company. $300 a month, every month, for 3 years." Carol jumped to her feet. "What is the meaning of this? You are out of order." I ignored her and clicked to the next slide. It was the business registration from the state website. "And this is the public registration for SecureGate Solutions, LLC. I'd like to draw your attention to the name of the registered agent. Martin Gable." I let the name hang in the air for a moment. "Does anyone know a Martin Gable?" I asked the room. Carol's face had gone pale. "This is an invasion of privacy. This is slander." "I believe you introduced him at the summer barbecue, Carol." Arthur's calm voice cut through the noise from the back of the room. "You said he was your brother-in-law." The room exploded. People were shouting. Carol was banging a gavel on the table, but the sound was lost in the uproar. Her 2 board members looked at the screen, then at her, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. They were realizing they had been her unwitting accomplices. I clicked to the final slide. It was a simple spreadsheet Arthur had made. It showed the total amount of money paid to the company, $10,800. Money that had come from our dues. Money that was supposed to be for our community. "You have been stealing from us," someone yelled from the crowd. "This is a lie. A conspiracy by a disgruntled resident who refuses to follow the rules." Carol shrieked, her voice cracking. But it was too late. The evidence was on the screen for everyone to see. Her authority, so carefully constructed over 3 years, had evaporated in 30 seconds. In the ensuing chaos, I saw a man in the back row on his phone. I recognized him as an off-duty police officer who lived on the next street over. He wasn't calling for backup, he was making a report. The meeting completely fell apart. Carol, realizing she had lost control, grabbed her purse and tried to storm out of the room, but her path was blocked by a crowd of her angry, betrayed neighbors. The rest of the board sat stunned at the table, unable to move or speak. The arrival of a uniformed police cruiser a few minutes later brought a sudden, shocked silence to the room. The officer spoke quietly with his off-duty colleague, who pointed towards Carol. They approached her and began asking questions. It was no longer a community dispute. It was a criminal investigation. The fallout was swift and brutal. The entire HOA board resigned in disgrace within 48 hours. The district attorney's office launched a formal investigation into the HOA's finances. Carol and her brother-in-law were charged with multiple counts of fraud and embezzlement. The story was even picked up by the local news, a humiliating public spectacle for a woman who cared so much about appearances. A temporary board was appointed, with Arthur as the interim president. Their first act was to formally nullify all fines I had accrued. The lien that had been filed against my house was removed. My name was cleared, not just legally, but in the court of neighborhood opinion. People I barely knew would stop me on the street to shake my hand and thank me. It was an odd feeling. I hadn't set out to be a hero, I just hadn't wanted to lock a stupid gate. The legal process dragged on for months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming. Carol's defense was that it was all a misunderstanding, that the service contract was for future work, but the jury didn't buy it. She was found guilty. The judge ordered her to pay full restitution of the $10,800 back to the HOA. She was also sentenced to 5 years of probation and 200 hours of community service. Her brother-in-law got a similar sentence. With the stolen money returned to our accounts, the new board held a special meeting. The first item on the agenda was the gate. They presented 2 options: remove it entirely or fix it properly. Then Arthur looked at me. "We also have a third option," he said, addressing the room. Jack Miller, who first brought this issue to our attention, is a professional fabricator. He has generously offered to repair and automate the gate for the cost of materials and a minimal labor fee. It's a fraction of what a commercial company would charge. The motion was put to a vote, and it passed unanimously. The next weekend, with the help of a few other neighbors, I went to work. I stripped out the old, burnt-out motor. I fabricated a new mounting bracket, installed a heavy-duty modern drive unit, and wired it into the old keypads. I re-lubricated the hinges and reinforced a section of the frame that had been bent years ago. It took 2 days of hard work, but by Sunday evening, for the first time in 6 years, our gate worked. With a soft whir, it slid open and closed at the touch of a button. It was a beautiful sight. A year has passed since then. Oak Creek Estates is a different place. It's quieter, more peaceful. The new HOA board, led by Arthur, is sensible and transparent. The dues are still low, and the only emails we get are about the annual potluck picnic. The community has healed. The divisions that Carol created have faded, replaced by the old, easygoing neighborliness I remembered. We're a community again. I saw Carol once, a few months ago. It was at the grocery store. She looked smaller, diminished. The self-righteous fire in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dull, weary shame. She saw me from a few aisles away and immediately turned her cart around, scurrying away before we could make eye contact. I didn't feel anger or triumph. I just felt a little sad. She had taken a position of trust and used it to feed her own ego and her family's pockets, and in the end, it had cost her everything. She had lost her home, they were forced to sell it to pay the restitution and legal fees, and her reputation. Sometimes, when I'm in my workshop, I'll hear the faint, smooth whir of the front gate opening or closing as a neighbor comes or goes. It's a quiet reminder of the whole ridiculous affair. It's a monument not to exclusivity, but to common sense. It's a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most reasonable thing you can do is refuse to comply with an unreasonable rule. Power, especially petty power, thrives in the dark, fed by apathy. It can't stand up to the light of scrutiny. All it took was one person asking a simple question: why are we paying for something that's broken? To bring the whole corrupt structure crashing down. I went back to my life, fixing things made of metal, happy to be just a guy in his workshop again. But I learned that sometimes, the most important thing you can fix is your own community.